Welcome back again for another COVID conversation. I'm Pastor Clayton Sellers. I'm pastor at Faith Lutheran Church and Preschool in Collierville, Tennessee, outside of Memphis. I'm glad to be joined by Reverend Dr. Timothy Saleska from Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. Dr. Saleska is the Dean of Ministerial Formation, Professor of Exegetical Theology, author of numerous books and articles, most notably the CPH commentary on the book of Psalms, Psalms 1 through 50, I believe. And perhaps most importantly, Dr. Saleska was one of two basketball coaches that I've ever had in my life, as he coaches the basketball team at Concordia Seminary. Coach, thank you so much for being here with us. Tell us just a little bit about yourself and how
Sure.
life is at the seminary.
All right. Yeah. So, thanks for having me, Clayton. It's a pleasure to be able to see you again. And we had a lot of fun together on the basketball court. And it's fun to kind of think back to all those days. So as you said, I always lead with professor of exegetical theology because my main job, my main love is to teach Old Testament. And so here at the seminary, I teach Psalms courses, but also courses on the prophets, courses on Torah, Hebrew language labs, kind of all those kinds of things.
Right.
I'm also the Dean of Ministerial Formation, as you said, which means I help oversee all of our formation programs, both distance and our residential programs. So we have great directors for all of those.
Right.
Which means that my job is to stay out of their way because they do great work. And I basically facilitate their activities and their work. So to help to build them up, support them, be there when they need some help with figuring out something other than that. So it's a pretty good gig.
Cool.
Before that, I was a pastor in Ohio for 15 years, Cincinnati for 13, which is where I got my PhD at Hebrew Union College. And then a couple of years in Napoleon, Ohio, as a family life pastor before I came to the SEM in 97. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, again, I appreciate you joining us. I want to start off with one question. I polled pastors across the synod, and they wanted to know why the class of 2013 at Concordia St. Louis was the best class ever. Now, I should say all of those pastors across the synod I polled were my classmates. So no, you don't have to answer that. But Coach,
a pretty good class, though. I gotta say,
it was a great class. Well, I agree.
It was a great class.
I agree. So real quick, if you would tell us a little bit about the pandemic and life at the seminary. I think it's probably a thing that members of Lutheran congregations might not know a lot about. And pastors, especially pastors who went through the seminary at St. Louis, are just really interested to know about how this all shook out there, especially in those opening months.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. It was kind of interesting, as you know, the news kind of broke slowly over all of us. So there's this virus, it's in China and stuff, and it's kind of seemed far away. And I'll never forget this meeting we had. I mean, we had actually started the softball season. So that was like February, I think. We had one game. And it was right before the break for the last semester. And I'll never forget this meeting that we had with the deans and kind of the executive management team and all that, that said, we're thinking of going online. And then I'll never forget Al Borkerding said, and then I started panicking because I haven't done anything online. I don't know any of the technology, all that stuff. So are you kidding me? And he goes, it'll just be for probably a couple of weeks. We'll start our courses and then we'll go back. I'll never forget that conversation. And then, of course, all hell broke loose. So we're going online. We have to make this online the whole semester. And, you got to follow the county guidelines and all that kind of stuff. And so in those 2 weeks between, I'll never forget this. I took it upon myself personally to spend a lot of time with the tech people because I had it. So we use Blackboard and this clunky Adobe Connect, which finally we're switching to Zoom because Adobe was terrible, but there was this clinging to it. That really bothered me. But again, I had never heard of Zoom and had not been, until this. And Blackboard, I didn't do much on Blackboard. That is usually used for the distance programs, and I taught taught very little in the distance program.
Okay.
So I had to get up to speed on that.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I had to transfer. I was teaching how to preach the Old Testament in a couple
Okay.
of lab classes. So I had to switch the whole class to how do you do online.
Yeah.
I had originally bought into the assumption that was out there before COVID
Mm-hmm.
that, okay, asynchronous teaching is the way the young people want to go.
Okay.
They love technology. They grew up on technology.
Yep.
This will be no problem.
Right.
I'll tell you more about the reactions to that and my further thoughts on that.
Yeah.
But after a week of trying asynchronous, which meant they have to do, I prepare stuff before and then they can watch whenever they want.
Right.
That was a total failure. So I had to re-switch my class again.
Okay.
Yes. So if you want me to go ahead and give my opinion on that,
Sure.
people thought, okay, online education is what this particular age group, most of our guys are younger guys out of college, or fairly in their 20s, tech savvy, love social media, they can do anything with tech. We get, for IT to help us with our computers, we get these guys.
Right.
So they hated it. And my wife teaches nursing at UMSL. She had to do the same thing I did. So we could share. I have a lot of experiences from kind of both realms, the secular public school realm, university, and my realm. And it's the same there. Students had paid to be face-to-face and they did not like it. They did not want asynchronous. Being on Adobe Connect has connection problems. Even Zoom, you get too many people doing it. And we managed to get through and we all did the best we could.
Sure.
But if people think that residential is going away, my opinion is nope, this reinforced the fact that residential is really important. And for a lot of reasons I can go on to discuss with you. Obviously for a certain segment of people, second career people, older people who are well in place, who are more familiar with the rhythm of a distance program that works. But even then it's hard.
Sure.
We do have our programs, distance ones even, are hybrid. To at least give people the opportunity for intensives 1 week or 2 weeks to come together several times in the programs to meet face to face. And so I think, contrary to what pre-COVID assumptions were about education technology, I think it's been reinforced. No, there's a real place for residential. I also think formative wise, there's a huge case to be made for that.
Sure.
I think you guys could probably say the same thing. Yeah, we did worship by Zoom. Okay, you got it done. But who wants to do that for the rest of it?
Right.
That's not a good substitute. It's terrible. It's awful.
Right.
And so, for a lot of reasons that go quite beyond theological.
Sure.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
No, that's an interesting that the students didn't like that asynchronous teaching.
Or the synchronous, even when I went live.
Right. So that's interesting. Some of the other guys I've talked to, there was all a drive to be streaming live as opposed to recording and posting to be viewed later. Because there's something about humans, there's something about people that want to have that shared experience.
Right. And I also think psychologically, yes, people will use technology for the social media and for movies, but the psychology of having to log into Blackboard, having to navigate it and then get to these assignments, disconnected from anyone. Psychologically, it's hard for a teacher, I don't know if you know this, to have to go in and grade 15 papers or 20 papers that are all kind of in there. You can find a million excuses not to do it. It's this kind of human gut level thing that you really have to overcome. And it's not pleasurable at all to do it. And so, students think asynchronous, I'll do this tonight. But at 8 o'clock after a full day, you're not used to it. Now I got to click in and I got to listen to this hour lecture. And now I got to do some kind of reaction paper. That's a lot more daunting.
It really is.
It's awful. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like it's, and I know that you've been obviously associated with the church and helping out and doing stuff. So it sounds like the experience at the seminary for classes was similar to the experience within congregations.
I would say that.
Yeah.
I would say that there's a reason we have residential education, and it's for formation, and
Okay.
it's for a lot of our students. There's a reason that some students need the distance ed. And those are very specific reasons, and we deal in different student groups,
Right.
populations, needs, and so
Sure.
our programs manage to all those. We just started, for example, a new online deaconess program,
Okay.
which is going to dovetail so the students will be able to take via live streaming
Right.
classes with the MDiv people,
Oh,
which is good. And then they have a few other additional ones, but it allows a lot of women church workers to get trained for deaconess where they are at.
Okay.
And that's, I think, a huge benefit to a lot of families
Yeah.
and people who just can't get up and move here for
Right.
a couple of years. for that.
Or congregations that would be able to benefit from the learning that's going on
Correct.
as it's going on and as they're
Correct.
putting it in place.
So I don't mean to say there's no place for distance
Right.
education, but there's always going to be a place for residential.
Sure. Okay. I want to switch a little bit from the formation side to the staff side of the seminary. What were the conversations like amongst the faculty and the professors and the leadership, throughout, but that things are probably pretty heated right there at the start of, not heated is not the right word, energetic around the start. What were those conversations like?
So let me, I'll divide the staff question from the faculty question, because we're kind of in different places. So first of all, I missed the collegiality. We used to, like, for example, get together at lunch on noon for informal talks. Just seeing people, that became a lot harder. Yeah. We still do the majority of some of our committee meetings, I think, on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Right. And that gets tedious to me as well. I think we'll move away from that model, but I also think there's a place for meetings, certain meetings for a certain amount of times via distance. So that's one plus that happened. Another thing that happened plus wise is we had to upgrade our technology, right? Which forced us to do, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah. But I think faculty wise, I think we're looking to getting back together more regularly. So at the beginning, we didn't have a lot of conversation between us. We just had to do our own thing. I think similar to what you told me before we recorded, that I was so busy, I'm just doing my own thing. So I was getting my class together, trying to get, and remember, everyone was kind of on lockdown, so we never actually went anywhere. Right. Campus is basically closed. So I used to walk in by myself once a week, and I'm not going to say anything else I did. I wasn't supposed to do it, but a lot of guys just stayed home because there's so much unknown about the virus, and you were trying to get over this as quickly as you can. Sure. So the staff, the technology enabled them to work from home. So they actually upgraded their computers so that they could get the things they needed and work from home. What I think is going to happen is what you hear happening in society for a lot of the staff, that there's going to start a hybrid model. Because, for example, my administrative assistant likes to work from home. Okay. And there's no reason that she needs to be here every day. Right. So I think I'm going to continue that for her, because I think it's important that our staff feel energized, and that if they can do their work distance-wise, I'm of the mind, why force them to make a long trip in here and all that? Sure. When doing that 2 or 3 times a week is fine, and it'll energize them. It'll help morale. That won't be for every staff. Some staff prefer to come in. Sure. So I'm hoping that we have that mixed model and don't try to force everyone. And so that's another thing that the COVID virus kind of revealed. Oh, people can work from home and do it productively and effectively. Yeah. And in a sense, it's very resource saving personally. Yeah. So it's great. What about the faculty, the professor side, the academic side of the seminary? How has that been? Like I said, the lack of getting together has, I mean, that's kind of a social, but there's also a exchange of ideas and thoughts and stuff that goes on there that I miss. I think that, there was a stopping of us going to like SBL conference.
Oh, uh-huh.
That was by Zoom, stuff like that.
Right.
But even, us getting out in the church for the past year, as far as pastoral conferences
Sure.
and other kind of engagements, was put to a halt. It gave me a little more time to reflect and read and do a little more writing. So that's positive. I mean, I did notice that the time that is kept up by little interruptions is less.
Okay.
And things, especially when you're like in a position like this, dean and minister of formation, there's immediate things that always need to be done. I always dread going on email because people write these long, hairy emails on technical stuff. Like, no, please. Or, people stop by with this, that, you gotta sign stuff. And so you had a lot less of that. So, there's some things.
Right.
But if you're an extrovert and like all the social stuff in the classroom, it gets real. I hate that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's, again, I'm not surprised, but it sounds similar to other experiences. I'm curious about, and I did talk to some classmates of mine and other pastors about this. The use of concordiatheologyorg. I personally, especially at the start of the pandemic and throughout, I check it regularly anyway. A plug for congregational.org, the blog side of Concordia Seminary. But I was surprised and maybe disappointed that there weren't more reflections or thoughts or some guidance might be too strong of a word, but that there wasn't more on there. Did y'all talk amongst the faculty and about how to use concordiatheology.org? Or
I think that there was a little of that. I think the issue was, as faculty, we were processing it ourselves, so it's hard to do anything more than basic, here's what I'm experiencing. But I think you're right to say guidance would be too strong, because we were in this huge learning curve along with all of you.
Right.
And in a sense, we're a little more isolated, because as a pastor, you got to lead in ways that outside of our classrooms, we weren't faced with that. The technology had to really, the technology people really had to, they're the ones that a lot of this fell on. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Again, it's just, there was.
No, I think it's a good question and a good point. And now there's so many books and stuff coming out. Like I said, I'm doing a review of one. I was asked to do one, and it was to pick out of like 4.
Okay.
So they've already been coming out. And so it's like, okay, it could be a little overkill here now.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not interested in really writing about it, because I have no huge overarching theological insights.
Okay. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing about life at the seminary and that sort of stuff. I want to switch a little bit, not a little bit. I just want to switch maybe from the professional side, if you will, to maybe that pastoral side.
Okay.
And especially about how we as Christians, as brothers and sisters in Christ, pastors, and real quick, if you can hear this in the background, I'm in my backyard because of COVID. Not because of COVID, I've got my kids inside, so I'm in the backyard, and the trash truck is driving by. I don't know if you can hear it or not.
No, I can't. Okay, good. Actually, trucks are driving by here all the time.
Okay, good. So I want to switch to that pastoral side and how we can reflect on what resources do we have? How would you help us to think theologically about this sort of stuff?
Okay.
I was doing a little digging on you, and I found a presentation where you were quoting an author, and the author you quoted said, like grief or pain, it islands you, and that phrase really struck to me, especially as we were quarantined and locked down. So if you would jump off from that about how we can think about these sorts of things theologically and faithfully.
Sure. So I'll start from the premise that we believe in the almighty, omnipotent God, who there's nothing outside of him, and he's the one who kills. He's the one who raises to life, as the scripture says. There's no outsideness of God. And so he's in control of all of these things. And so as Luther talks about this, he is in some sense behind all this. So first of all, it's a daunting thing to remember. Second of all, God actually hides himself. So his reasons for doing these things, he hides himself. Again, Luther, that's a big concept.
Yeah.
So we're never going to find him in the things that happen in our daily lives. We're not going to find reasons, his reasoning or his mind in all of these things. So against all that, I always try to keep in mind that we have to go for hope then in wherever we are, to the one place where he has revealed himself, and that's in his word made flesh predominantly, where he has spoken to us. And we always kind of center our lives and hopes on what he promises us in our Lord. And that promise is one day he's going to set all things right. One day he's going to raise us from the dead. That our death is not eternal, it's temporal. That for us, God's wrath has a limit. And that's what's included in the promise. And so I think that move from trying to theological explanation about all this to proclamation is important, because it's that very word that brings hope to people and strengthens people's faith. So if anything, the situation that people find themselves makes people hunger for, what about this sense of meaningless that I have in my life, or this sense of isolation? Maybe for a lot of people, it's real suffering if they've lost loved ones, or if they've, some people suffer real daunting after effects from the virus, and unforeseen. And so there's also a lot of pain. And then you have makes a deal with, you have other people that trivialize it, think, oh, I'll escape, or nothing, and are willing to take huge risks and risk other people. So I think pastoral responses have to be ready for both. So for the one, again, where do we find comfort in our sadness? And one of the things that the Psalms do is give us the language of laments. So when you lose your language, the Psalms can supply that language. And they don't leave you in that sorrow. Remember, most of those laments take you to the hope for God's chesed, for his grace.
Wait. You said God's chesed?
God's chesed, the Hebrew word for grace. Faithfulness is faithfulness, his loyalty. So the Psalms, the laments function as kind of a liturgy almost, in that they will express the psalmist expresses his grief or his pain, his questioning, his confusion. But the psalm doesn't dwell there. It actually leads you. And so at the end of most of the laments, you'll have this turn to trust in God. And you saw that in Psalm 90, but you see it in Psalm 22, certainly, and in a lot of the classic laments, so that it gives you also the language to think about where your hope really lies. For the other people who, I do have to say this pastor, because I do think it's a pastoral matter, who trivialize, I think that, resist things. I'm going to speak kind of very frankly here. That makes people uncomfortable, but we have to remember that we don't just live for ourselves, we live for other people. And sometimes we sacrifice ourselves for the sake of other people. And we do what we don't like to do for the sake of others. This is how Christians show love. And serve. So, in our country, we're so used to thinking of freedom in terms of our individual rights. This is my right. I don't have to do this. Christian freedom is totally different. It's freedom to serve. That's a whole different concept. I think the church has lost that, and we're reluctant to talk about it. We'd rather talk about political freedom in the secular world, rather than, this is how the New Testament talks about freedom. It's we've been freed from the gospel to serve others. And so when people say, for example, I'm not going to wear the mask, it's my freedom, you realize that the mask is actually for other people, not just for, it's to protect others. And you may not like it, and that's just kind of one example of where I don't like the politicization of this, and how the church in a lot of places bought into it. And that's where I think now pastoral care and pastoral discernment gets very important, and especially pastoral leadership. Are we really showing love for other people? Are we really acting as Christians?
Okay.
Or are we kind of thinking, oh, the state's just taking away my personal freedom.
Right.
I'm going to resist it and all those. Now, people are going to hammer me for this. Okay. Maybe we should have this conversation about what it means to serve, what it means to be a Christian. And maybe that's an important conversation to have. There it goes. There you go. I gave my controversy for today. Maybe you want to edit that out. I don't know.
No, it's up. Thanks, Coach. No, I appreciate it. And before we delve down into masks and whatever else, because that's gonna devolve into an internet mud fight, right?
It will. I'm worried about it, actually. I'm not going to answer. I don't know.
But so I guess
like controversy.
So I was just at a pastor's conference, and one of the things that was mentioned was that, and I'm gonna tie this all together.
Yeah, no, fine.
That anger is a secondary emotion. So people present as angry to cover over a grief or a sorrow or an anxiety or something along those lines. How can the Psalms, especially those laments, help us fight through that politicization, right? Because maybe it's like it's easier to be angry than it is to be sad.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
fearful.
It's easier to be political than it is to be faithful, or maybe it's easier to lament the political because we don't have the words to lament theologically. Is that I know this is kind of a new thought we're exploring together.
Sure. That's I think I know what you're getting at. I think that that's a good point, that we have a mixture of emotions: anger, fear, frustration, and everyone suffers from those. And as pastors, we have to be able to really listen and sit with people and not react when someone pushes against, for example, okay, I think we should wear masks for the sake of other people. People get angry and disagree. We ought to be able to sit down and discuss it without getting angry. Sure. I do think that if we are gospel-centered people, namely Jesus-centered people, his grace is the foundation of what we gather around in that word of proclamation. Then the next question is, okay, how do we embody that in the lives, in our lives together, and in our lives individually, in our lives together, and to the neighborhood? How do we help other people to see the glorious wonders of the gospel?
Sure.
And if they see us acting in angry ways and fighting each other, that doesn't bring glory to Christ.
Right.
And so I think that our starting point has to be who we are as God's people.
Okay.
Because who we are is how we live.
Right.
And that's not law. That's kind of an identity question.
Right.
It's not, you have to do this. It's, oh yeah, this is what we are as God's people. This is what it means. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. That reminds me of somebody you quoted in a piece you wrote, I guess 5 or 6 years ago now. I'm going to quote it to you now. And it's from an author named Stanley Fish.
Right, okay.
What you believe is what you see, is what you know, is what you do, is what you are.
Yeah.
Right. And so you summarize this, that what you believe is what you are. And so we believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that he died on the cross and rose from the grave. And because he has new life, we have new life. We're that new creation.
Yeah.
And that's going to shape our vocation and how we behave and act in the world.
I think it's really important because we're members of a lot of communities, but the world should be able to see that there's something very distinctive about how Christians live and talk and treat each other.
Sure.
And when they don't see that, there's a problem.
Yeah.
When we're not bearing proper witness to who we really are as God's people and what God has done for us. If we mirror society in our politicization, I've never gotten that word right.
It's tough one.
Our polarizing attitudes.
Right.
And too often the church as a whole tends to mirror the culture rather than engaging with it in appropriate ways and bearing witness in words and deed. And that's always been a challenge. It's not necessarily a new challenge. But it's something we have to be really wary of, especially in kind of this day and age. Because Yeah, because the gospel's at stake here.
Right.
People are going to listen if they see how unloving you are, or
Right. Do
how
you?
you really care more about the United States than
Mhm.
the kingdom of God.
Do you think that some of it is because we don't know how to grieve? We don't have we've been island as we started a
Yeah.
little bit. We've
Yeah.
been island. We've suffered this trauma and this grief. And you quote in another one of your presentations, you quoted this, that in the midst of drama, we lose words,
Mhm.
and we want that language. So maybe as a nation, we've lost the nation has lost its ability to grieve,
Mhm.
and or doesn't have the words for it. And then as Christians, we've lost we've forgotten the language of
Mhm.
lament and grief, and that's driven some of this.
Well, I think there's a point. Yeah. So, yeah. So the question is, how are we going to talk about these things, everything that from what's deepest in our hearts
Mhm.
to kind of what's going on outside of us? How are we going to do that?
Mhm.
And what words, and so what words are we going to adopt?
Yeah.
What are we going to take to heart? And so if you adopt the words of our culture,
Mhm.
rather than the words of the scriptures and who we
Mhm.
are as God's people, then you know that's going to influence how you're shaped, how you
Mhm.
perform.
Mhm.
And so I do think we, as we talk about these things, that's why kind of just um, gentle
Mhm.
conversation,
Mhm.
and let's kind of look at how God would, asking us those questions. How
Right.
does the Lord want us to talk about these things? How
Right.
does he want us to act?
Mhm.
How does he help us in our decisions? Moving forward in those ways is much more productive. I mean,
Mhm.
we always have sin at the door ready to get in. Sin's a
Mhm.
very real power that grips our hearts,
Mhm. Mhm.
tempts us to listen to other words,
Right.
other voices. And
Right.
so, you know, we are all guilty, and I'm no
Mhm.
exception to that. And so I think we need a special care for
Mm.
that. I
Mhm.
think pastors, maybe because they're kind of the leaders in their congregations, uh, need to be really thoughtful about.
Right. Right. So in gaining those words of scripture, I know you spend a lot of time with the Psalms and you've written a lot about the Psalms. I'm going to ask you a leading question. Is it appropriate for us to adopt the Psalms as our own prayers? Because like the psalmist is going to cry out about the my enemies that encircle me, the strong bulls of Bashan that encircle me,
Right,
or my enemies gloat over me, or they lay
right,
a trap for me,
right.
or there's a lot of this language that sometimes when I'm reading the Psalms, when I'm praying the Psalms, or using them at a hospital visit or in a pastoral context, there's almost a hesitancy that
Sure.
maybe this language is too strong for me to use.
Hmm.
That is it really as bad as King David being chased through the desert by King Saul?
Hmm.
Well, we're not being pursued in that same way. I I don't always feel like I'm being trapped. So
Right.
can we adopt how can we adopt that language of lament even in our own day and in this time?
That's a big question. You have to go to my conference next year. No, but I'll try to do the short answer is that first of all, the Psalms are poetry, and poetry
Mhm.
takes you out of the individual specific historical context in which
Okay.
it was written,
Yeah.
and it expresses truth on a more universal, broad level. That's why
Okay.
so many people can identify with the
Mhm.
language of
Mhm.
grief or anger, sadness, and joy,
Yeah.
and peace, and all those things. So you hear that whole continuum of
Mhm.
voices in the Psalms. So I think it's a matter of, as you read a psalm, to think about it as entering into a conversation with
Mhm.
the voice.
Okay.
And if the voice is expressing grief and sorrow, then you start to, just like if you're sitting with someone and they're expressing something that is outside of your immediate experience, if they're expressing, the pain that they felt during a visit to the hospital or some
Mhm.
incident that they had, you can't identify necessarily at that point in time with what they're
Right.
feeling. You can empathize with it. You can
Mhm.
begin to ask yourself, what must that be like?
Yeah.
And what if that would happen to me? So you start to ask yourself these kinds of questions in your
Mhm.
engagement with the psalm. And you also realize, there's a lot of people for whom these words fit perfectly.
Mhm.
Um, maybe I need to think about them and pray about them. And so depending on the situation you are in your life, certain voices you will resonate very strongly with, certain ones you'll feel more at a distance. And yet even those the voices in which your individual experience is at the present distant, you can learn something from that. And you can think about those words and think about how they may be true for you and in what way they might be true, in what way not. If not, why not? What do I do about that as well? So it's that kind of engagement that meditation involves us in, that when you are in a church service, you don't really have the mental space to contemplate that like that. And so that's why it's a different usage in your liturgy or in your prayer life in a public worship service than in kind of private meditation or engagement.
Well, I had a thought that I was going to follow up with you, but it has slipped my mind.
That's right. That happens to me all the time.
I know. I don't remember what it was. So we're just going to move on. So I know you've got another appointment that you need to get onto, and I really do appreciate your generosity with your time. I remember what it was. Would you send us out on this? That Lutherans are really good at the theological and kind of that mental part of faithfulness. Send us out on this, because I think we're craving language. And there's a lot of stuff that's going on in our hearts, and the hearts of all people. Going back to that grief, and we're arguing about the wrong thing because we're not engaging the fullness of our emotions in this. How can we be faithfully emotional? And I'll narrow it down. How can the Psalms help us faithfully work through our emotions?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I think that how can the Psalms help us work through? I think that they provide the opportunity to reflect us being Lutheran Christians, grace-centered people, people who have our ultimate hope in Jesus. The Psalms express, and this is totally Luther, for us, the prayers and cries of God's people as we wait for him to deliver on those promises. Just like in the Old Testament, Luther saw that those who were living between the Exodus and Jesus coming these were the cries and prayers of God's people. We too have been connected to Israel's story. We look back on Jesus' redemption, but we also look forward to the final consummation. We're living in these between times. These are prayers and cries of God's people as we wait for him to come, and the waiting sometimes gets very long. And very hard.
The pandemic makes it feel even longer and even harder.
Is part of that. When Lord, when are you going to set things right? When are you going to deliver fully on the promises? So, that's that tension between the now and the not yet that we always talk about. That I always remind people that's not a fancy theological doctrine or idea. That should be a lived experience. And the Psalms bring us into that tension as they celebrate God's redemption, which is true, yes, and yet we hope for it. Now, not yet. You know. And Lutherans are used to paradoxes and tensions. So this is kind of part of that experience for us.
So I'm just going to summarize to close us out, that the Psalms, being the songs and the hymns and the prayers of those who are waiting for Jesus to come, are still the songs and the hymns and the prayers of those who are waiting for Jesus to come.
Yes, exactly.
And so that they can help us then give voice to our emotions in our experiences in a way that we might not always be comfortable.
Yes. Very true. Right. Bonhoeffer had that. The Psalms are the only book which are God's words to us and our words to God. They function both ways, right? They're God's words to us. These are how he wants us to pray to him. So we do. And so that's why they're so popular for us in our liturgy and our public worship and songs, but also in our private meditations, private devotional life. Why they're such a wellspring of spiritual strength for us in both individual settings and also our public worship settings. So
very good.
So I hope I don't get slammed for what I've said here, but
yeah,
please be gracious, everybody.
Well, I want to call you Coach, but I'll call you Dr. Saleska.
No, call me Coach. I like it better. It sounds cooler. Way cooler.
All right, Coach. I really appreciate you generously taking the time to be with us for another COVID conversation, for sharing some of the experiences at the seminary, talking about the pastoral formation and the importance of that in-person residential program. I appreciate you helping us to consider what it is to live faithfully as the people of Christ in his new life as we wait for our new life, and how to use the Psalms even in this pandemic. So again, I thank you for all your time and your generosity. And I want to thank you, the viewer, for being a part of this with us, for taking the time to engage in this conversation. And if you'd like to get in touch with either myself or Dr. Saleska, we'll put our contact information in the description below. And I'd love to hear from you about your experiences as well. I wish God's richest blessings to all of you, and to you as well, Coach. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Clayton. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.